All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 46 today,
Yo,
and
yo.
we have our good buddy Andrew Tischler back on. How you doing?
What's going on? How's it going? Well,
Good,
Doing
good.
well, doing well.
Um, so what's been going on since the last time we talked? I know we were both looking into Tom Campbell, and then you emailed me about Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, which I kind of got the wheel spin. I'm like, that sounds familiar, and then it's obviously some of it's related to the Stars Academy and those guys and stuff since Hal Puthoff joined that. But why don't you talk about remote viewing and kind of how all this stuff got started?
sweet. So I think you mentioned his name is a guy named Ingo Swann. So he's actually responsible for coining the term remote viewing. So I think you pretty much want to start with him. Although there's a field called parapsychology that's been around for quite a long time, even over in Europe back in like late 1800s, there was people studying that. But our story starts with Ingo Swann. He was introduced to Hal Puthoff in like 1972 by a guy who is now famous for hooking up plants to polygraph tests. I was looking into him a little bit. He's a little bit of a odd.
Are they lying or what?
The plants or who? Oh,
Yeah.
exactly.
Tell them the truth or what's going on?
He had this whole thing about like if you would like end up like killing like brine shrimp in front of like his house plant, like the like get a reading.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of but Ingo Swann was introduced to Hal Puthoff by this guy, and I kind of did a little bit of research to try to tell you guys the whole story, so we can kind of get into that too. But basically, the United States military or their government was looking for someone to do some research into psychic phenomena as a response to rumors they were hearing coming out of Russia, right? So I kind of did a little research. I think it'd be fun to go into a little bit. So it's a lot about the Cold War.
Okay.
I really didn't know too much about. I don't know how much you guys know about the Cold War. We're a little young.
I mean, I know a general, I guess, from history class and just stuff I've read and YouTube videos.
We know what they want you to know. I'll say that.
So I did like a crash course I found on YouTube that was just a moderately informing. So it was, basically when World War II ended, it was America and Russia that were the unaffected parties. We were the two superpowers vying for control over the globe, basically. You have communist Russia and capitalist America. And they each wanted to spread their influence. We wanted to spread democracy to the world, and they wanted to spread communism to the world. So we ended up having fighting a series of what's called proxy wars. And there was a good list I was reading, and it's kind of interesting today as well to hear this list. So it was proxy wars. There was some intimidation between the countries. There was propaganda battles and some espionage. So even back in 1945, Russians were using propaganda and espionage to try to influence world affairs. Anyway, the one interesting thing I heard Russell Targ say was that Lenin, who is one of the communist leaders in the Russian Soviet Union, he believed in psychic abilities, and so he was the one key that kept Russia interested in psychic research, whereas everyone in America was very scientific and all that. They weren't interested. So the point there is that they got started in like 1945 with the whole psychic thing, and America didn't get started until the 70s, when they'd heard all these years that Russia had been using psychic spies and all that to try to get influence and intelligence on different sites in the American, in the country and all that. Anyway, so America basically wanted someone in the country to prove that psychic research was impossible and false, so they could stop worrying about the Russians, right?
Right.
So that's the whole thing, is they just wanted someone to tell them that they didn't have anything to worry about, and that psychic research was false, and that there was no such thing as remote viewing and all that.
That ended up not being the case, right?
Exactly. So that's the story. That's the stage, right? So then in the 70s, they tag Hal Puthoff, and they ask him to try to find some way, you know, to look into this matter. And when Ingo Swann showed up in his, you know, mailbox or whatever, he said, okay, maybe this is the opportunity. Brought Ingo out and interviewed him. And a cool little thing happened, you know, during that little first meeting. I suppose there was a piece of equipment at SRI, which is the Stanford Research Institute out in California, where they did a lot of the research. They had set up this equipment. This physicist basically dug a tunnel about 20 stories deep into the ground and built a chamber and put a really, really subtle machine that could read. They were looking for, I think it was like gamma rays, right? So they had to get all the stuff. They had to set this machine in a really remote place that wasn't going to be influenced by radio waves and who knows what. I don't really understand it. But they put this this little, you know, polygraph, whatever it is, down in this tunnel, and they asked Ingo Swann just to go look at it. Could you use your mind and go down there and tell us what's going on in this little machine? And when he tried to go and view it with his mind, the needle swang and moved.
Shit.
Okay, so he had affected this thing that was only supposed to pick up gamma rays or this particular whatever. And so when the needle moved, like the graduate student that was involved in keeping track of the whole test flipped out, lost his mind, and was like, why did you do that? What just happened? It's not supposed to move like that. That was really weird. You know, I got to go test everything now. There's obviously something wrong. That was a coincidence. So this poor graduate student spent like all these hours testing it, fixing it, calibrating it. And then like a couple hours later, they do the same thing and the needle moves again.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So that's where Ingo got to start. That's where all of the money came from. It was like this proof, scientific data that for whatever reason, when Ingo tried to view the machine, it wiggled and it's not supposed to. So that's the beginning of it all. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, it's you know.
Weren't they trying to trick? I saw something where they were trying to trick them too. They'd put different things in the box.
Well, yeah,
One time they put like they had the military guys in there, and there was something about like he said it was like a butterfly, but it ended up being like a leaf. But it was like so close, like you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they after that initial meeting, they got some funding from the government. But the whole point was that like everyone that would talk to Hal Puthoff was like, hey, I hear you're working with this psychic. They're obviously like lying to you, right? They're trying to pull the hood over you. They're just out for the money, right? That's how psychics are. We know all about psychics. They just try to screw people out of their money. They lie to people. They're charlatans. So everyone was really skeptical. But yeah, they're doing these tests and it's working, right? Like Ingo can tell you what's in the box. He can tell you what's in the next room. He can tell you. He ended up actually getting really annoyed with them. He left his life in New York as an artist to come do all this research. And they had him doing all this trivial stuff. And he said to them, like, look, I can see across the planet. I can see anything you want. Why are we wasting time? If you want to see what's in the envelope, open it, right? Like, I can do cooler stuff than this. So yeah, it went from there.
How long did it take him to start making him predict stocks and stuff?
Right. So
it always comes back to the stocks.
Well, it's pretty cool. So like, again, doing the research on the Cold War thing, it was, let me see, look at my notes here. Where did it go? Anyway, like in the 50s, oh yeah, here we go. So Truman in the 50s established the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, the CIA, and the NSA. Okay, all that was established in the 50s to try to combat the Russia, Cold War, communist, Red Scare, all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So we get all these intelligence agencies that are born during the Cold War. And it just got to the point where eventually when any of those agencies got desperate, they knew that this wing of the Army was working with psychics. The Army was the first one to start. They basically, after the Ingo experiments, the Army sent a couple of volunteers, a couple of soldiers, and they wanted to see, okay, can you train these soldiers? You know, we went through with all of our people. These people have a seeming to have a bit of a natural gift for psychic abilities. They did some random tests, and they gave them this crop of young soldiers, and they said, okay, train these soldiers to be psychic spies for us because that's what the Russians are doing. We need to keep up and catch up. So there's a guy named Joseph McMoneagle who's really famous. He's fun to look into. He's got a lot to say on YouTube now. He's one of the original. He's like the first soldier psychic spy. So if you think about that movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, you know,
I
that's
was just going to ask you about that. Yeah.
that's what that story is, you know. Then they say this is based on true events, and they go on to like make a mockery of the whole idea and make it into a joke, which is honestly so the kind of the point is like while there's these like, you know, about 20 or so people working for the military doing these psychic researches, just trying to disprove it most of the time. Anyone involved like doesn't want to believe it's real. It's just like the people in the program that actually know that this stuff is real, but everyone else just basically thinks that they're all being lied to or that somehow it's false. So like it's really funny. Like they'll turn to them when they need them, and then say, "Oh no, we never worked with them, and they're a bunch of liars and stuff." So they would, you know, McGonagall says a bunch of stuff like we found, you know, we worked with people in Iran in 1972, and then we did this for the military, and you know, in this place, and we did that, and we worked with this person and this person. And he's got this whole list of all of these jobs that they did. Yet, if you ask those agencies, they'll lie and say, "Oh no, we don't use psychics" or whatever. Yeah, so that's kind of how it went for about 20 years.
Well, it sounds about right. You know, plausible deniability. Let's
Right.
separate ourselves from the crazy people, because
Exactly.
the last thing I think the government would want is for people to think like they're doing shit like that, in the sense that there's no real hard evidence to show people.
Sure.
So it's one of those things where it's like you just said, we're going to use it. It's effective for what we need to get done, but we don't want to come off crazy to the general public, because this would be like news to them, you know, like
Right.
the public, as much as we try and give credit for, like, oh, everybody's educated, they're really not. I mean, everybody they're educated in the sense of their daily lives and what pertains to them specifically. But if you were to ask people about a lot of the stuff, especially a lot of the stuff we talk about on our podcast, they'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, they have no idea. So
that's true. You know, it's if you think of yourself as a reasonable and practical person, you're going to say that psychics are not a thing. And most of the military, most of the scientists, most of the government says that. I agree. So here's a real funny point about all of it, though. Ingo Swann tells this story all the time. So, you know, they're getting millions of dollars from government agencies to do this research. But when people fly in and like, you know, have lunch with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ to talk about some of the results, they're afraid of Ingo Swann, right? Ingo always talks about like they're afraid to have lunch with Ingo. And the reason is they're all afraid that Ingo is going to just start reading their minds.
Yeah.
And figure out their secrets and whatever they're embarrassed about, or whatever, you know, government official stuff they're not allowed to talk about. They're afraid of the psychics. You know, this is the point. So Ingo knows that they're afraid of him. There's a funny story where they send Joseph McMoneagle, they send two different psychics this coordinate. It was this guy's summer home that was just a quarter mile away from this super secret, top secret facility, NSA facility or something like that. So they send the coordinates to this little cabin that's like near that area. But each of the two psychics end up just describing, Ingo and Joseph McMoneagle, where they both describe this site. And when they asked, well, we sent you to one place, but you both drew this other place close to it. Why did you draw the NSA site, not the cabin? Well, they said, well, in psychic space, things that you intend to keep secret shine brighter than anything else, right? So Ingo Swann, his whole point about all of the whole thing is that the U.S. government operates on secrecy. It operates on the premise that it can keep secrets, you know, from both the enemies abroad and, you know, high technology, economic secrets, you know, military secrets, all this stuff. Basically, international affairs operates on the premise that we can keep a secret. And it's not even wrong. Like our social lives operate on the premise that you can't read my mind. You can't tell exactly what I'm thinking about you. You know, we have all of these like social etiquette stuff in place. With psychics, none of that is there. Like Ingo's point is that literally, if we were all psychic, there would be no secrets. No secrets.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy to think about. You know,
that's what they don't like. That's what's unsettling about the whole thing. So the government can say, oh, we need psychics when like we have these, you know, hostage situations. But in every other instance, it's too uncomfortable to admit that it's actually happening. So that's the big push and the big resistance.
So why don't you go back to what we were talking about, where Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ met at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and started working with Ingo Swann. And then from there, what happened? Did they continue the research? I know what was Project Stargate? Was that?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great question. So like I said, one of the initial steps after they confirm, so basically they do the Ingo Swann experiments, and they have all this very, very high percentage evidence that Ingo is actually performing psychic stuff. They do, they send in a couple army people out, try to debunk it. They can't. So the next thing is they set up this army wing with like a handful. Like I'm saying, like some of them were, again, soldiers that they ran a couple of tests on a whole bunch of soldiers. They picked a couple they thought had some natural abilities. And then they picked a couple that they thought would just be straight men, to have, you know how they do scientific research. You got
like a controls.
So imagine 10 or so people working with a couple government, how put off in them. But basically, I went through this list that McMonigal said. So they did stuff where they would try to get information, remote viewing, while they're lucid dreaming. Okay, they would try to do it while they're having out of body experiences, and he brings up Robert Monroe.
Yeah,
who, the guy I mentioned is Tom Campbell's mentor. They have the Monroe Institute in Virginia, which still exists and still teaches people to go out of body today, right now. So they worked with Monroe, so they get into the out of body state and then do remote viewing. And so there's distinctions between what those things mean. But they would do remote viewing under hypnosis, and he also mentioned in altered states, which he didn't say what that was, but I have to assume they probably did LSD in those.
We know what it is.
So
DMT, LSD, psilocybin.
Something with the D.
They tried to look into the far, far distant future. They did distant past readings. They did research into like things at a cosmic distance. They would go to other stars.
What about sleep paralysis? Was that in there?
They didn't mention that one, but that's a yeah. But they did.
So what time frame was this again? Sorry, just to remind me.
What's it?
Was this in the 70s, the 60s?
This would be after in the 70s. The whole SRI started in 72, so then this would have been probably 75. It went from 75 to 1995 officially, and it had a couple different names.
Didn't they separate too? Something about like Stanford was getting heat for being associated with that, so they cut off the research institute is like a completely separate entity or something like that.
Yeah, there were a couple splinters, and then that's why they kept changing the name. I guess one's called Sunstreak when they were working in coordination with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then when it was the CIA, that's when they called it Stargate. So that's just one of the names that they used when it was, so it's gone under different names. The first one, apparently Center Lane. I don't even know what that is. I've never heard of that. But Stargate is just the one that sticks. It's the most interesting one.
Well, we've all seen the movie with Kurt Russell, which is...
So Russell Targ says that they called it that secretly about 4 years before that movie came out. So, it was...
That's funny.
Yeah, exactly. So they got it first. But yeah, so it went on. And yeah, I really think, I mean, I have a buddy, and this isn't very hard evidence, but he was overseas in Iraq at one point. And he said that I asked him, I was like, have you ever heard of psychic, information that was derived from a psychic? And he was like, normally I wouldn't believe in anything like that. But the number of times that we were sent on missions because of psychic information proofs. And I was like, what? Like, he could be lying. I find him, moderately trustworthy. I know, but who knows? But yeah, he even mentioned that. Who knows? Maybe that's true. So I think the military... It ended in 1995, and I've heard people that were involved, like Joseph McMonigal, people that were on the ground, Russell Targ. As far as they know, the U.S. government is not currently researching psychic ability, but it may just be a black budget, black op thing that they're no longer being told about, because you have to imagine they are.
We got to get your buddy on and get to the fucking bottom of this.
I know, right? That would be pretty funny. He was just an infantry guy, so it would have. It's probably rumors. I don't know what it would be like.
Well, here's the thing, too. The other thing is maybe it's past the point of research. Maybe they're like, this works. We have people to do this. We're not. Why put money into something that you already know works?
Well, exactly. You have to imagine that they're just doing it at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Point of no return at this point.
It poses an internal problem. It by them accepting that they're using it, it also, potentially could threaten the entire system that's taking advantage of it, right? So they have to keep it. They have to walk that fine line of like, no, of course psychics don't exist. That would be absurd. But we have them stashed away down. It's a fine line they got to walk.
I mean, the thing I think about that too is people are like, "Oh, we want the truth," or "Oh, we." To be honest, like to quote A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. You can't. I mean, like most people, if you were to tell them this stuff or explain these situations, they wouldn't know what the fuck to do with themselves because their whole life they just woke up every day, did their routine, did their thing, and that was it. So for I think that maybe there is a benefit. Maybe that's what the whole point of this is, just to slowly acclimate people over the years. So this group keeps getting bigger, bigger, till it gets to the point where it's like we can talk about this, or maybe there is some sort of benefit.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure. I
mean, look, I'm just trying to take a skeptical. Everybody wants to play conspiracy and this and that, and I think there are real things associated with that, no questions. But I also think that we give people too much credit sometimes. That these things are big systems with a lot of people, and there's just ignorance involved with some of these things too. So I think I look at it as like air, like nobody's perfect, and to hold some of these people to these such high regards that they're not making mistakes either is I think
Yep, I hear you. Absolutely. It's a complicated world.
It's super complicated. So why don't you talk about things that they found though, like through the research, like through Hal Puthoff's research, like what were things, like some conclusions that they've come to regarding the actual remote viewing process, and possibly other maybe even being in touch with entities or stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot to unpack. They developed a pretty rigorous system about what kind of it's better to just go ahead and look at some of the direct videos that go over the process they use to get into the remote viewing state and what kind of information they get. Again, Joseph McMonigle is the guy that has a couple of videos up where he'll go right through and tell you his exact experience when he was remote viewing, as far as how it works. So that's pretty interesting. He was just saying how you don't even tend really to see images, but he just called them perceptions. He said that it might be a taste or a feel or a smell, and he talks about learning the difference between like your rational mind trying to come up with an answer that makes sense to the question versus just random, like Russell talked about, just stuff that wasn't in your mind, you weren't thinking about it, you're not stressed about it. It's just something comes to you from this unknown source, and that's the kind of stuff you got to pay attention to. So it's really about training your attention. And I know they use like what are those chambers called where you float the sensory.
Oh, those Joe Rogan's float tanks or whatever.
Sensory deprivation chamber.
Yeah.
But yeah, they started with a lot of military sites or just random sites. They would send just to a bridge or a pedestrian bridge, and they would see if they could figure that out, get that down. But I would say the most interesting stuff they eventually moved on to were like they sent Ingo out. They had heard that they were sending a satellite to I think it was Jupiter. And they said, wouldn't it be cool if, it's going to be there in 3 months, we're going to get these amazing images. Wouldn't it be cool if we made some predictions about what they were going to find before it happened, right? So they sent Ingo up, and he viewed Jupiter, and he actually stated that there were rings to Jupiter that they had previously not known about. We know about the rings of Saturn, but there were these rings to Jupiter that were not visible from Earth. Ingo had mentioned that they're there, and they were confirmed months later by this NASA spacecraft. So there's a pretty famous story where what's his name? Not Neil deGrasse Tyson, but the guy that did the show before that, Cosmos.
Carl Sagan.
Yep. Yeah, he has this really unfavorable review of the notes that Ingo had written about his traveling to these other planets. But Sagan, of course, he's going to do that because he's one of these people that is popular about being a skeptic and all that.
Early on though, he was all about panspermia, directed panspermia. It seemed like early in his career he was optimistic, and then when he got involved with other shit, it seemed like maybe that changed.
And then he wrote Contact.
Right. But no, so I mean, I'm not big. Obviously, I think it's important for everyone to research all of the interesting sort of paranormal and sort of under whatever. A little, it's just interesting to go into all that. But for Ingo, you know, he went to the moon, right? They had him go to a site on the moon that he later discovered was the moon. See, the cool thing, so I mean, it's fun to point this out. One of the things about remote viewing that McMonagall mentioned was that the difference between a psychic and a remote viewer is that for psychics often that, first of all, they're given all the information about the source that they're trying to work on. So you come to them and you say, my name's John, I just got divorced, I want you to tell me this exact thing. I've given, you know, you've got the person in front of you, they've got all, you can read their body language and all, you can say what you want to hear. With the remote viewing, everything is double blind, right? So you're usually just handed literally coordinates, like 4.4 west by 2.2 east, right? Like that's what you get. That's all you get. And the person that's interviewing you, they don't know what it is either, right? So every single person in the room no one knows what the point of you could be talking about a cat, a paperclip, or the moon, right? That's how they premised all of these things. So they send them they give them this piece of information that's supposed to clue them into what they're supposed to psychically remote view. Anyway, so they send Ingo to the moon, and he finds buildings on the moon. And then he finds people on the moon, or what seem to be people. And so he reports all this in one of his books called Penetration, which I read just because I was curious.
If it was a porn or not.
Dude, stop taking my jokes, bro.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I forget. He calls it penetration because he goes into all the definitions of what it means, and he makes this whole argument about whatever. I forget what they are. So yeah, Ingo Swann. So he and then I think McMonagall talks about going to Mars, but like, you know, he actually says like hundreds of thousands of years ago. And he finds beings there building pyramids on Mars hundreds of thousands of years ago. So he's got a whole thing about that. So all of them end up.
Some bold statements.
I know. Like literally, I mean, McMonagall is saying a whole lot of stuff on YouTube right now about aliens walking among us and this kind of thing. So it's definitely a hotbed of interesting opinions coming out of.
Do they ever talk about like dimensions? Because like
yes.
What I think about when I think about this stuff is not that physically there is not another three-dimensional thing there, but possibly a fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional, something that we can't even perceive in this state of mind.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's reports of aliens sort of popping in and out of thin air, you know, and that points to dimensional travel. He's also talks about, you know, either you're talking about interstellar travel, which is like incredibly hard to figure out. He has this funny term called fire wagons, which is a spaceship is a fire wagon because you're just using like really, really advanced fire technology to propel yourself across really long distances. But if you've got interdimensional travel, you can fold space and move across the universe with a different type of technology which is more feasible theoretically than.
Right.
Don't they call that like red shifting or something? I saw Tom DeLonge was actually talking about that.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't heard that term.
Where they can like what you just said, like fold. So when you're looking at a UFO, it's not a streamline, like you're not watching it go completely. What you're seeing is like 1 point, 2 point. It's just like showing up in different points.
Well, they all move thousands of miles an hour through the air apparently. So yeah, I mean it's something. They're so erratic that there has to be something we're not understanding about them. Whether they're psychic projections of the mind or physical entities. McMonagall was talking about that they're mostly carbon-based, which means he thinks they're probably somewhere in the universe, but that they maybe are traveling interdimensionally because that's just more feasible. So they're still three-dimensional creatures, but there's just other aspects to them. I'm more prone to viewing them, through a consciousness sort of spirituality lens, but when these are the people I'm relying on to prove that psychic things exist, and if they're saying these things, who am I to say that this part of their theory is right and another part's wrong? It's very hard to say.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think is the most, like, from you researching this topic, what do you think is the most interesting thing that you've taken away from the whole subject? Like, what's like a synchronicity or something that you felt like it gave you chills when you learned about it or read about it or whatever?
Interesting.
Aliens.
Yeah, no, I think to me it just goes for me further and further. Like I was listening to an Ingo Swann lecture this morning, and he was kind of harping on the audience, he was talking about, everyone's trying to do this research into psychic phenomena using the scientific method. And he was like, this is the definition that parapsychology gives, is using the scientific method, trying to do blah, blah, blah. He says, well, what's the problem with that definition? And he kept saying, well, the problem is the scientific method is based in materialism. And these things are not happening according to a material philosophical view of things, because they're inexplicable that way. There needs to be a better explanation. So, the connection is consciousness, and that for me is what's always exciting about it, and that it just reaffirms that there's a larger paradigm shift that needs to happen so that these seemingly paranormal things are seen as normal. When you shift your paradigm, things that look impossible from one perspective are now, you see the stuff, you see the pieces you were missing. And so it just, to me, again, points to just that larger argument about trying to find a better paradigm for understanding our reality. It connects all of those things together.
Well, don't you think, though, like that kind of is interesting from the standpoint of what you just said, materialism and reductionism and science. And we've had you on where we talked about Tom Campbell and, quantum physics, the double slit experiment. I find it interesting, like even some of the top people like Sean Carrolls and Mimi Okaku and all these physicists, they don't understand what's going on with dark matter, which makes up like 95% of our universe. And it seems like science has been struggling for any sort of big breakthrough in the last, even though we're getting so technologically advanced, it seems like there's no more Einsteins or Teslas or any of these people left. And we're grasping at straws at this point to figure out what's going on. I say, why not? Yeah, well, Elon's probably one of the outliers, but why don't you look at the things that we're talking about as a possible explanation for some of these things? Not that they should use that specifically, but why not have an open mind to it when you don't have the ability to explain it yourself?
Yeah. No, and if you dig back into the last real revolutions in the materialist worldview, which is quantum mechanics and Schrodinger and some of these guys, they're all talking about the same. It's pointing to the same picture for them, which is that consciousness is going to have some effect on it. The observer plays some role that we've yet to define, and at the end of the day, the observer is always part of the situation that they're trying to explain. So consciousness is part of the puzzle. It's part of, it has to be part of the whatever solution to it. So yeah, no, I think I agree. Like clearly, we've gone as far as we can with that mind frame and with this skill set, and that we just need to bring a more holistic set of minds. We need more people from broader disciplines to come in and sort of help carry us further. That whatever.
Yeah. I mean, look, we love science. We talk about science a lot on the show, but I think it's naive to just put all your eggs in that basket when we don't even know what we are, why we're here, what created this whole thing. They don't even, they know the Big Bang, but what happened before the Big? Now they're saying there was a cycle and there was something before the Big Bang, and then it's just going to keep reoccurring over and over and over and over again.
So it's not that the scientific method is a problem. It's just the formulation that we're working with now. There has to be a small snag in how we formulate our method that's creating these big blind spots in our view of reality. And when you fix that formulation, the blind spots go away, and you see the larger picture.
And we're assessing all this through our eyeballs, which are connected to our brain, and the signal gets sent upside down and interpreted by the brain. And we're supposed to just take the word of our eyeball. We're trusting, we have all these senses, and we're primarily just trusting this one sense for all of our information, pretty much.
Well, you're going to get me on a whole other tangent, but the point is,
go off, man. We can talk about anything.
Well, that's really just where philosophy, from Steiner's perspective, is just appropriate to be aware of and to talk about. But I think again, my point of view is that it's not the thing that we're relying on primarily isn't our eyes or our ears; it's our minds. All right. So our mind. This is a point Steiner always tends to make. See if this sticks. But basically, he makes this point about dipping your finger in water at different temperatures. So if you put your finger in a hot water, you can say, okay, this is hotter than my body. I can tell it's hot. I can tell it's cold if it's cold. But if you are incredibly hot and you put yourself in room temperature water, you can't tell if it's you that's hot or the water that's hot. So it seems that our senses lie to us depending on, but he just points out, like, if you heat up a thermometer and put it in room temperature water, it's going to take time for that thermometer to drop down to 0. So it has the same adjustment rate that our skin does. Anyway, the point is that while our senses lie to us, our minds can understand why we're being confused by our senses. So our minds always give us the ability to transcend all of that data and organize it. So it's a question of the mind. And the other point of view is that all of reality always takes place in one of our fleshy body consciousnesses. There's that idea that reality exists outside of us, whether we're there or not. The new paradigm suggests that no, we need to be there for there to be a reality. We need to be these fallible, fleshy human beings.
That's kind of biocentrism.
Right.
That's what it's.
Yeah, you have to work with eyes. In fact, Steiner says that the universe wouldn't develop organisms with eyes if there weren't light for those eyes to perceive. The light actually designs our eyes so that it can manifest itself in our consciousness. Where there are no light, creatures that don't get exposed to light, their eyes disappear evolutionarily in deep sea crevices and stuff like that. There's no eyes down there because there's no...
Yeah, in caves and shit.
So the universe, these qualities existed in the universe and sculpted our organisms so that they had the potential to manifest in our consciousness. It's that our eyes are a blessing from the light of the universe, you know what I mean? So it's not that's the point that Steiner makes. It's a very human-centric point of view or a consciousness-centric point of view. They're not to be, again, it's in combination with the mind, we basically can know all things. And that, yeah, so that's my whole tangent, is just like having a little bit reliant on the human body and the human experience of,
I was thinking about that too, actually, right before we jumped on. I was listening to some videos and just, thinking, and the thought popped into my head, like, we are the observer. Like, what if we never existed, or we didn't, did this whole thing start with consciousness? Was that the beginning? Because like we can date stuff and do stuff, but I mean, when it comes to consciousness, was that the first cause? And since something was able to perceive something else, is that where it all started? What if we didn't exist, would all this exist? I personally don't think so, but
right. No, that's part of that new paradigm I'm always trying to talk about, is it would be like designing a video game that you knew no one was ever going to play. That's the materialist point of view. It's like the universe was evolving whether or not we were ever going to be here, and it's just this process that was going on blindly and dumbly, and it just happens that we showed up as like a growth on the outside of it. That's wrong, right? That would be like the universe working towards something for no reason, and it just happened to evolve consciousness somewhere along the way. The point is that a order of conscious entities, in order for it to make itself, the loving thing to do for consciousness is to create more consciousness, basically. So the original God consciousness, in order to increase in its own love of itself, created other beings, and those beings created other beings, and they create universes, and so it's just this endless cycle of creation of consciousness, exactly. So it would be no point for this universe to exist if it weren't. For Steiner, again, consciousness was basically waiting around until it could go into a body that was as evolved as ours is, because, again, it's all about making choices. We wouldn't need to be in the, like a plant is, they always say, Steiner, plants and animals all share single giant group souls, and those, they animate how the plant acts and how the dog acts or whatever. But with humans, we all have our own I ego, because it's a much more complex system. We basically learn more being a human than we would being a dog. A little bit of a tangent, but it's just so great to be human, and we are, the universe is here because we are here to learn and to do things. It's just a wholly different view of reality than you're typically fed.
I try and tell myself that every morning, especially if you have like a tough morning or, whatever. You just say, hey, we're living, breathing magic. We're lucky to be alive. Let's fucking go out there.
And that strife that you're dealing with is an essential ingredient to making the universe a more loving place. You're always dealing with something that's pressing and important for you to solve. You're an essential ingredient to reality, and your karma is what dictates the experience you're having, exactly. And it's not an accident. It's exactly how it should be. It is a helpful worldview, even when things are hard, because you say, it's okay, I can get through this. I have the potential to get through it. All this stuff.
No, that's awesome, man. I think the same way about that as well. But I just think that it's good to talk about this kind of stuff, because I don't think people do think about this kind of stuff on a regular basis. And I think if people did think on those in those terms and on these topics, I think there would be less anxiety, less depression. A lot. I think we're a civilization that's losing its soul, or we're lost. People are, like you said, 100% reliant on reductionism at this point, and it's
more people are waking up lately.
Yeah, there is, but I think
news is being spread via internet, which some is good and some is bad. That's the problem. You don't know what the fuck to take in. That's honest to God or whatever.
That's true.
Out there, you got to decipher what's the good shit or not.
But that's just going to make us stronger and smarter, right? Yeah.
True.
Hopefully, we're on the upswing of that fucking cycle right now. But let's talk about Hal Puthoff's recent work with the To the Stars Academy and like what that could mean. I think, like I said, I read some of their books, the Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda, and the one that's nonfiction, I think it's Gods, Man, and War. Right. A lot of it's predicated on this phenomenon, aliens and UFOs being non-physical. There might be some element of, like what you said, like psychics type stuff or remote viewing type stuff. So obviously to have one of those guys on the team points to that kind of being the case.
Right. I don't know too much about that side of, like, I've been following Russell Targ a tiny bit more than I have with, but if I don't know if you want to say anything about it. I don't know too much.
Oh, no, I was just curious if, like I said, it's just one of those things where I think it's an interesting, look, I was skeptical of Tom DeLonge. I think a lot of people are, when you ask for money for stocks and, to create this company, and
where
it's just
are
like,
you?
If there really is something there, why wouldn't you be able to get funding from private sources or stuff like that? But at the end of the day, it is what it is. And I think if they come out with good stuff, awesome. I besides those 3 videos that were leaked, that were part of that New York Times piece and the release of all that stuff, there really hasn't been too much in the news, which those are actually credible. Those were pilots that were recorded in cockpits using the latest thermal imaging or infrared imaging. And the thing about that's interesting is that they don't know themselves whether it's otherworldly, if it's another country's top secret programs, or what the case may be. So it's one of those things where obviously, like I said, having a guy like Hal Puthoff on the team to kind of debunk these things or figure it out, is probably a good thing in that sense. But why don't you talk about Russell Targ then and what he's been up to lately?
Yeah, it seems like he did that TED Talk a couple years years back that ended up getting revoked from the TED lineup for violating their rights or
guidelines. TED Talks, the best ones.
TED Talks, exactly. So, but he makes the point how back, like in the 80s and 90s, everyone knew that remote viewing and psychic abilities were a thing, and that they were out there, and that there was even just nightly news topics, and they would just discuss it. It was a thing that was discussed, and then at some point, throughout the 90s and the 2000s, it just basically got erased from the cultural lexicon. We just don't talk about it as much anymore. We sort of all accept that it's not a thing. So it's almost just not even talked about. So Russell Targ is just trying to basically shed light on the subject of psychic abilities. He's got the whole, even McMonagle was just talking about how we all have this ability. It's just that we're taught not to use it. We're taught out of it. But if we were all to simply accept that it exists and use it, it would, like you said, it would make us all a little less anxious. And
do you think it's something that everybody can do, or do you think it's a bloodline thing, or what do you think's going on there?
He said it's the best metaphor is just simply it's a talent-based thing. So some people are naturally born with a lot of talent, you can some people just have to work much harder at it. It's a lot like he also refers to it as something like martial arts for the mind. So any of us could learn to do martial arts if you commit to 3 hours a day, and any person can learn to do anything if they simply effectively practice for 3 hours a day. Now you might find all sorts of barriers to your effective practice, especially when it comes to mental practice. You can, if you spend a little time thinking about it, you start to get a picture of how and why some people succeed and why they don't. Like, again, addiction to me is always a pretty big thing. If you can't focus and calm your mind, then you're not going to get too far. So there's simple things that are going to inhibit you. Maybe you're really, power hungry or something, and you just have this one single-minded focus. I just want, then you're probably not the right person to spend all this time, but no, it's something you can either practice doing. Now, so beyond Russell Targ, I actually just, I'm a Tom Campbell fan, so I keep up with, I'm on his YouTube channel or whatever. So he just posted this documentary. I watched it this morning again. I was a little unsure what to think of it. And it's a little, I don't know. Basically, there's this group in Germany who are teaching kids to see without using their eyes, right? So I was like, what's this?
Nice.
I click on this documentary and I watch it, and there's this facility with all of these kids in this, basically this jungle gym kind of setup where they're driving go-karts blindfolded, they're climbing rock walls blindfolded, they're playing air hockey blindfolded.
Are they doing it well? Like, are they?
Yeah, they are. Like, yes, like, well, like, they show the kids blindfolded, and then you see them climbing the rock wall, and their hands go right to the spot. And he was saying, like, their feet have more trouble because the scale thing. And anyway, and then he started talking to some of the kids, and they were like, yeah, they're all like 8, 10 years old. So I don't know if it's dawning on them how odd what they're talking about is, but they're like, yeah, at first you just see a little bit, and then it gets wider, and now I can. And they're asking them, is it different than your normal sight? And they say a little bit. I don't know really what to make of it, but it seemed pretty clear that, like, they can do the how many fingers thing 9 out of 10 times. Like, I mean, they're just matter of factly saying I can see through my mask. This just came up on the feed yesterday. So they're always talking about. So it's a thing that all children experience at a young age, but we're just not educated to continue to do it the way that we're educated to do math and all this other stuff. But beyond that, I heard all of them make this point that they really wanted to emphasize this, that basically the human species would not be here if it weren't for innate psychic abilities. And so it was kind of that thing about, like, when you're trying to choose which cave to put your whole tribe in that night, they would just intuitively know which one was the one that wasn't going to have a bear come back to it in the middle of the night and eat half of them. Like, he basically said that this skill was something that primitive people relied on as a second nature thing, which place are we going to go to be safe every time? And so basically they said that a lot of people, and if you look at primitive societies today, there's a lot of, telepathy, or just, they say it's just something that we take advantage of. It's something that we would never have survived without. And that each of us, Ingo Swann talks about, if you're out in nature and you're wandering around and all of a sudden your body stops before your sort of consciousness knows why, and you look down at your feet and there's a cliff, right? So your body had noticed and stopped you, but your conscious mind wasn't present of that fact, and it only came to realize it after the body had already stopped. Well, that's the psychic phenomena for him. That's an example of this. It wasn't precognition because you weren't even aware of it, but your body had already stopped. And so stuff like that has kept us alive for 1 million years. So not only can everyone do it, but we've always been able to do it. It's just that our culture has no use for it. We have to do more waking life, mathematical calculation, right, when to go where, and all, whatever. So it's just,
it's been proven that intuition's a real thing. I think even scientists would agree that, but what, in the sense that you're saying it, people don't look at it like that, but that's an interesting thing because we've all taken a test or we've all played a quiz game or whatever. You have that intuition where you're like, oh, I knew that was the answer, but for some reason I picked this other answer like a fucking idiot, Yeah.
And so because you have no recourse to say, well, why did I, I was clearly just guessing, because that's the only explanation my culture gives to me, is that it was just a guess and there's no reason to rely on that. But if it's something you train from the time you're born, like walking, like breathing, who's to say that it's not going to be a lot more prevalent and a lot more accessible for everyone to use. So that's the argument that they're trying to emphasize, is that it's simply that we're educated out of it. And that's why this documentary in Germany was saying, like, well, if you teach kids and affirm this ability, like, these kids are walking around with their eyes closed, like, I don't know.
It's like a little army of daredevils.
Right. I mean, like, literally, they were like, the one girl was like, yeah, I have more confidence among my peers because I can do this thing that they can't, right? Like, so it's kind of cool. Like, their anxiety was going away because they were learning this skill. Like, it was like what you're saying. I mean, it was this
sick. I want to learn that shit.
Yeah. She was 10 years old. She was like, yeah, I'm yeah.
I think anybody can tap into that. Like you said, it's practice, but like, okay, so when I started to learn how to meditate, yeah, the first couple times, nothing really, but then you keep doing it, and then suddenly something happens and you're like, what the fuck? I mean, I can honestly say that the first couple times where it really happened, when I meditated, were more intense than most of the psychedelics experiences that I had when I was younger.
Wow.
And I'm being honest, I'm not, bullshitting. So
Bullshit.
so I think from that standpoint of you're saying, oh, how can I do this? Or I want to try that. Well, learn how to meditate and also lucid dreaming. There's this point for me, at least, and I think everybody's different, but I'll go to bed from like, go to bed usually a little bit later, but let's say I go to bed at 1 o'clock and then I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning to the bathroom or something. And then I come back. When I fall back asleep, that second time, boom, I go right back. I go into it where I don't even remember the dreams that I had during the larger portion of my sleeping. But when I go back to sleep, it's almost instantaneous and it's vivid, and
it's like cannabis blocking
it feels more real than real sometimes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, yeah. And a little bit of training and all of a sudden, right, like they were doing remote viewing in their lucid dream states. So like, yeah, if that's not motivation to have a little bit more interesting life, like that, I don't know what is. Like that sounds great, yeah.
Well, you think they're gonna start teaching that stuff at the Waldorf school?
Right. Well, I wonder why they're not already. I guess it's a little. Yeah,
it would turn into a thing where it would be used agast them.
Yeah, exactly. It's so political.
Witchcraft
exactly.
and shit.
Right. So they have to walk in again. The Waldorf school is a school set up based on advice Steiner gave to teachers about how to raise kids in our age. It's not a school to train people to be like Steiner or to understand his philosophy. So they keep a really healthy boundary from Steiner. It's just a school based in some of his.
Yeah, but I would think that they would mention it though at some point. So you would be like, like there's got to be some backstory of like why the school is the way it is. And
yeah, they all know that this guy Steiner invented it, and they're all told in like 8th or 9th grade. There's all these books you can read and go ahead and try them. They have this all. There's this joke amongst them that it's this really hard, weird books. They're not really sure what they say, and they all. So they're all normal kids. They just went to this weird school, and they still try to identify with all the peers, right? So they don't have it's not like they're given this larger picture of reality, really. I think it's less of that and more of, I always hear like, all of the Silicon Valley people, anyone who's anyone there, like they all send their kids to Waldorf schools because they know that screen time is bad for young minds. So like Waldorf schools are famous because there's no screen time until you're like 16, right? Like you don't watch. Okay. You don't do computers, you don't do video
right.
or whatever. So because it's not healthy for the spirit, for the human spirit to be whatever, like Steiner has this, a roundabout advice or whatever. So it's just a particular environment. Anyway, yeah.
There's not a Rudolf Steiner statue in the middle. You have to like give sacrifices.
Exactly, and they're not like talking about all the hierarchies of heaven and this kind of stuff. It's more, they just do paintings and they emphasize art. They emphasize different stuff.
So would you say that like Rudolf Steiner or Madame Blavatsky or Edgar Cayce, would you say that these people were most likely remote viewing? They just didn't understand, or?
No, it was the thing with remote viewing is that it's tied to the idea of the scientific process in like a lab. So like McMonagle said, it's also remote viewing is something that it's not removed. It's removed in space, but not time most of the time anyway, or because then you can't corroborate it. So it depends on it. Basically, I wanted to just, as a way to summarize the whole remote viewing thing. It's again, it's good to think of your mind as like the stage, or it's the computer screen. Like you are the user in a computer, and when you wake up in the morning, this like the major program starts running, and that's what you're viewing. But if you train your mind, you can minimize that program, and all of a sudden you have this blank space. It's like a Google bar. You type in whatever you want to type in. Now you're querying either the Akashic records or the simulation where it is right now at my friend Joe's house, and I'm remote viewing, or I'm, asking some entity this great cosmic truth. So I'm doing something, astral project. It really just depends on where you take that Google search. And the thing is, you're consciousness, so you have access to all of reality. That's kind of like that big major takeaway for me, is that this points to the fact that as consciousness, we are sharing in the one, which is everything. Like, so we have access to literally everything. And that's so exciting.
Don't you think that, how do I want to put this? Well, like if you look at the internet, it's almost like a modern day Akashic record.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the thing I think is that we're substituting what we should be and what we should be doing with this technology that's almost doing it for us, or we're becoming like lazier. If you know, I don't know how to put it, but like a lazier mind, kind of what you're talking about, like about the kids not looking at the computer screens and stuff while they're at school. I think there's something to that in the sense that you're not connected. You're not as connected as you would be if it was just happening. And I think it takes away a lot of the mystery of life. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I love going on to YouTube or Google and Wikipedia and having those amazing tools at my disposal. I probably wouldn't know half the shit that I don't, I wouldn't know. But I think there is a limit that you should be, doing this stuff at. It's just very tough with today's society,
Yeah, it's dawned on me that, like, if instead of building this giant web of technology across the entire globe, we had just focused on all becoming psychic, we wouldn't need AT&T to video record us with our daughter in India, because we could just do that on the psychic realm, right? So like everything that's been done technologically, we could potentially be doing with our own minds. Like, I do think that that's an interesting point, but instead we've chosen to do it the very technological way.
Oh, the easiest way out.
The very easy way, right? Yeah, because it does it for us. So there's a guy named Andrew Lionel who's a Steinerologist or whatever. He's a guy that researches Steiner, and he's got a video called Steiner's Surprising View of the Future. And he cites all of these quotes that Steiner makes about how eventually humanity is going to fuse itself to technology, and there's going to be this like technological double, a body double, that like we are like whatever. So his view is that Steiner actually predicts that we're going to fuse, it's that whole singularity thing where man and machine fuse into one consciousness, and we take on, like, which I don't know if that's what Steiner is or not. Maybe Lionel is just seeing into something that's not actually there. But Tom Campbell also mentions at one point in his book that like technology, if you think that like, breast implants and stuff is one thing, but like when you start getting to genetic modification and then further and further, he was like,
what CRISPR's doing right now.
What's it?
I
said what CRISPR's doing right now.
I maybe I didn't hear about that, but
CRISPR is like a genetic, they alter genes and stuff, and they just used it, and I think, was it Asia? They did something where they altered babies or something.
So Tyler Campbell just like vaguely alludes to the fact that like we have seen nothing yet, and the future is about to get way weirder than we can even imagine right now because of technology. So it's very hard to say, and I just think that yeah.
So do they advise us to go down that route, or
that's what you have to, so Lionel says that for Steiner it's inevitable that that's the way you go, but that's his interpretation. So I'd have to go in and try to interpret Steiner in my own way to find out. I don't know if I could say, but like with Campbell, he just alludes to
it's just gonna happen.
Yeah, that makes me nervous. I'll tell you why. I would, let's say hypothetically there's another dimension, there's another realm, there's a heaven, there's whatever. Getting like you fuse with this technology, they upload your consciousness onto a thing. Now you're trapped in this fucking conscious.
Yeah, but that's I think that's a bit science fiction. Again,
it's a Black Mirror episode, first of all.
No, it's probably Futurama if we're being honest. But
consciousness is you are a conscious ego, and you're a fragment of the whole consciousness, and the whole system is working towards love. So those are the things that you're an individual whose purpose is love, right? That's Tom Campbell's philosophy. So in any if we were to sit back 1,000 years ago and then someone was to try to describe you and I life right now, you would have the same reaction, like, well, that just sounds dubious to me. But it wouldn't have changed the fact that love is still the point, and your individual growth is still the point. So no matter what the environment is, your individual growth is still the point. And as long as you don't lose sight of that, no, you wouldn't want to build yourself into a technology.
But don't you think the technology thing is a cop-out in the sense that we can't reach this pinnacle of love ourselves, or we're too slow, or whatever you want to say, but then we create these things that are programmed to be like that or to do that, maybe, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, we are nature. So what we create is what nature created. You know, we are the figurehead of nature. So I don't think anything we do could be necessarily labeled a cop out. It's just about intention. It's just about intention. It's not. You're building a scenario where we do it because we're lazy, but you don't have to build it that way. You know, which just simply a piece of the picture. So it's about.
You don't think humans fusing with machine is an evil,
You know,
future?
No, I mean, we do that today, right? Like,
true.
Our phones were pretty much cyborg already with our phones in our hands all day. You know?
I always make you know, it's like, you know, back in the day when the internet was just coming about and there's people saying like, well, this tool seems dangerous. Basically, the point is that there's no such thing as a dangerous tool. A tool is dangerous in the hands of a person with intent to do something wrong.
That's right.
All tools are just a fact, you know, whether they're, you know, it's about how we use them. So it's all about our intention. And that's the point. Yeah, it's about realizing that individualism and love is the point. You know, again, if that's always your starting, if you keep that in your perspective, nothing can take you off of that path.
Well, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and you're an ape. You better fucking.
Let's talk about Tom Campbell, and now that you bring him up. I messaged you. We were talking about this. I read his book, the first book, because there's 3 books, right?
Right.
I think I got halfway through the second one too, but I stopped reading it.
Technical after the first one.
It wasn't even. I didn't even stop because of the technical. I like the technical stuff. I stopped because I realized he's got his model, and it's a great model. I think the whole theory is a great theory, and I like his work, and I'll continue to watch his videos and support him and whatever. But it's not he doesn't look at the psychedelic aspect of things, and I'm not saying that you have to but that should be taken into account considering the millions of people that have done these substances that have been transformative or conscious altering. You know, he addresses it. He says, oh, well, you know, my mind is my tool and I can't afford to. I think that's what it is in the book where he talks about, he's like, I can't afford to take chances because that's, you know, my main tool is my mind or whatever. So he talks about how he has his motorcycle and that's his drug or getaway or whatever. So,
right. Yeah, I unfortunately, I actually have this conversation with my girlfriend all the time because she's a bit of a psychedelic advocate, and it was always a point of contention with her as well. But I mean, from my point of view, I don't see how I can argue with Tom Campbell about the success he's had with his process. He clearly has achieved an incredible amount of success with his approach to doing things. And then the other problem I have is that most of the people I research don't rely on psychedelics to achieve these higher states. You know, Steiner and Swedenborg and all of these figures.
Yeah, like I said, I meditate. I mean, I haven't used these things in years. I'm just talking about I've done them, and I know.
Well, even Ken Kesey, man, he used to take the acid, and he elevated above it.
Well, even Neil Cassidy, the bus driver for the Merry Pranksters, would drive 100 miles an hour through red lights and know that he was going to be fine and not get into an accident because he had that like precognition or whatever you want to. But so I'm just saying, like, it's obviously been used by the government. It's a thing that they know has some sort of correlation to this. Why not at least do an experiment where you're watching other people go through this, or
well,
you know,
that's another part of the picture is that with McMoneagle, they clearly did do that because, you know, the government had no qualms about giving soldiers psychedelics and civilian psychedelics. So he said that they came to us and said, well, what happens if you do this on acid? And I think the ultimate point was that it doesn't help. Because in order to do remote viewing, you need a very steady baseline, clear mind. And anything that's coming into that clear, empty space is it's noise. It's noise to the signal. If the signal is a non-physical thing, and you're trying to isolate that thing in all of the universe, and you're querying it about that one signal, everything else is noise. And that's Tom Campbell's point, is that it's all noise. The mind is all powerful. And
do you believe that though?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, consciousness is the theory. Everything we experience is via our consciousness. That's fundamental. So you give consciousness LSD, you change it. You give it a universe to live in, and you change it. You give it, you know, a human body, and you change it. But the thing that's always consistent is consciousness. And so Tom Campbell's point, and all of the sages of all of history say, once you get to that base level of consciousness, the rest of the portals of reality are opened up to you. Whereas LSD is just, it's not even its own realm. I'm not sure what.
I think that's the worst one too. If I'm being honest, I think psilocybin and DMT are probably the two that.
It's almost like, with DMT, you're right. You're changing your own biochemistry. So that's a feature of consciousness. But with Campbell's theory, you're trying to get behind consciousness, right? You're trying to
Gotcha.
You don't want to. It's not about altering a specific type of the chemistry. You're trying to get beyond your body or something in that vein of thought. So for them, all of that, Tom Campbell quit caffeine. He quit sugar. He quit. He's in the sugar movie. Because sugar affects your consciousness. It affects your.
Absolutely, it's a drug, 100%.
It becomes addictive. So again, if he just wants to go have a chocolate pretzel, but he's in the middle of the chamber floating in a thing, right? But he's focused on his chocolate pretzel. That's not going to help, right? So like that's what's so impressive about Tom Campbell to me is that he's trained his life around this research that he does. And again, with him, it was all about repeatability. People are so skeptical of this process that if you're on acid every day to do it, that's just not repeatable, whatever. So for Tom, it was about minimizing the noise, minimizing the randomness, all of that stuff, and finding that, pretty basic.
What I will say is this. If you look at like Timothy Leary or, some of the famous psychonauts of all time, with Terrence McKenna or whatever, I think you can obviously overdo these substances where what you're saying almost like clouds the waters a little bit. But I think if you have a baseline of it, like I've had this experience, I know what it felt like.
Right.
That can just only add to your hypothesis or add to, it's almost like proof. It is almost like physical proof. Like, yes, you can do this thing where like I said, lucid dreaming, I've had experiences in meditation. Those are awesome things that I would prefer to do over these other things. Right. But just having that other thing as a baseline of a physical, tangible thing you can put your finger on and say this is an experience, that can't be denied.
I think I look at it. I mean, I'm thinking of a metaphor in my head, whatever. Like, LSD is like a lifesaver when you're floating in like a rough ocean, and they toss you this thing and it pulls you onto the shore. But once you get to the shore, you don't need, so it's something that I think is it's an incremental part of people's paths. But like if you're talking about, there's
using it as a tool for remote viewing or building a theory based. So I guess I get what you're saying is like he wanted to make this thing 100% scientific so it could be credible and used to get out there to the most number of people without seeming quacky or whatever.
So there wasn't space for him to be using. But again, I think you're right. The point is that what I'm not saying is that no one should ever take LSD and that it could never be helpful in their personal growth. That's definitely not what I'm saying. It's just that like once you've reached a certain level of balance in your life and you want to become a master remote viewer, it might not be the case that a weekly dose of LSD, like you just don't need it. You don't need it. It's not that you might not benefit from it. You may very well benefit from it, but it's just not a necessary ingredient. So like Tom Campbell does it without it. Well, I don't need to be mad at him for that or whatever. And I know what you're saying is that he doesn't seem to advocate for it.
I'm not mad about it. It just seemed like he was almost like against it. There's no reason to talk negatively about it if you've never experienced, it's like the person's like, oh, you're a drug addict, you ate mushrooms. Well, have you ever fucking done it? Like.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the thing you really have to realize is that everyone is always playing politics. I think for Tom Campbell, it's probably a politics card. He doesn't need to be on YouTube advocating for LSD use while he's trying to break into this. So I think he's playing a political card as well. It's about, everyone can't take all chew all those bites or whatever. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's.
Actually, I agree with you now that I think about it. That probably is exactly what.
Exactly. So if you ask him, in his house, maybe he tells you a funny story. So it's hard to say. And I think you're right. I think it's fine to. I think the ultimate point is that, you can do it without it, but you can do it with it, and it's really up to the person to find out their path.
Well, I would like to see a study on these people that can remote view or have psychic abilities after they've developed it and honed it in. If psychedelics would then have the same effect on them after, or have as much of an effect. I know there's some like DMT, I think, boom, once you're gripped in it from everybody. I've never done it, but everybody I talk to on our podcast is like, once you're fucking in the thing, you can't get the fuck out,
I have heard one funny story. I don't remember if it was Alan Watts or perhaps it was Terrence McKenna, but they were recounting this story. Maybe it was Ram Dass, I forget whoever it was. But they were over in India in the 70s, and they wanted to give. I think it was probably Terence McKenna.
We talked about this actually on one of the ones we did with you.
They gave one of these, monks, these master monks, a dose of DMT or whatever, and they were like, "What do you think about this?" And they said, "Oh yeah, that's just." And they gave some old Indian word for some realm that yogis had been visiting for 1,000 years. It's just, like it's
like nothing to this guy.
They said it was the closest to death you could get without dying, or that's the closest you can go without coming, or with being able to come back, or I forget what it was.
Yeah, I feel like maybe the story's been changed at some point.
It probably has.
But, the monk, it wasn't something vaguely, brand new to the monk, but it wasn't also a place that the monk constantly strove to get to. It was just, that's one of the available states of reality. Yeah, sure, it's there. Yep, and you can get information out of it if you have the right question. But if you don't know why you're there, then it's going to be as useless as any other experience you have. So
my opinion, though, on what you're saying, why it would cloud it, though, I think it would be more in the terms of it's such an intense experience that it's almost overwhelming. So what you're saying about being able to focus, having something like boom, shoot you into a fucking another dimension and not even have any context for it, makes no sense because you're seeing everything at once that you've never seen before, Right.
I think that's really the point is if, I just watched Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That's a fucking awesome movie.
But they asked the computer, what's the answer to everything? And it says 42. And they were like, well, what the hell is that? And he's like, well, what's the question? You don't know the question. This is the answer. But in order to know why the answer is relevant, you have to know what the question means. So they said, well, then what's the question? It was like, well, you got to have to ask another computer to do that. So you have to know the question in order to know the answer. And I think that's probably a big problem with DMT is what's the question?
I got a question here on our YouTube chat. Maybe you guys can answer. Are there any women associated with remote viewing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that was one of the cool stories that McMonagle gave. I forget her name. I should have written it down. But she was one of the people brought in to be a control. And she ended up being like one of the best psychics in the entire program. So a bunch of the women. Oh, her name's Hella Hamid.
I saw actually there was a YouTube video on that. Somebody could probably look that up if they want.
Yeah, Hella Hamid, that was her name. So she was just one of them, but a couple of them in the program. Another guy's name was Pat Price. He ended up working for the CIA for like a month, and then he ended up dead. So that was a little shady. They weren't. His friends weren't too happy about that. He was like the best one ever. Pat Price could walk into with it. He could OB and go into. He was apparently the only person that could read. In remote viewing, he could read file names in the out-of-body state, which I guess was very, very hard to do. He was the only.
He was a little too good.
He was good. So, he got in trouble because, he would read off file names of programs that no one was supposed to know about, and they were like, the only way you can know about this is if you somehow broke into our facility. And he was like, "Look, I did, but I did it. You told me to. I went out of body and I did it." There's a couple women. Yep, Hella Hamid is the one I can remember now.
Yeah, because you would think that women, they're a little more in touch with feelings and stuff, that they might be able to be better at it.
They were brought in as controls, and some percentage of the ones that were just random volunteers ended up being better than most at it. It's definitely a good intuition. Yeah, it's something to follow. And I've run across quite a few, like Helena Blavatsky, is the first one I can think of, but there are quite a few women psychics in the field that you can read about that have a lot of prominent history. Whether some of them are quacks or not, I'm not sure. But
people think that Baba Vanga lady, she predicted some shit.
Yeah, my girlfriend loved Baba Vanga. Yeah,
she was a blind mystic. She had some weird thing where she said there's always three. There's three things always watching or hovering, and I've heard that from other weird non-associated sources too. So maybe there's some weird shit.
That the 45th president would be non-white, and it would be the last legitimate 44th. The 44th president would be non-white, and it would be the last legitimate American president, and that our country would collapse. And so my girlfriend's always like, "It's happening! It's happening!"
Jesus.
Baba Vanga was right, and I'm just like, roll, slow your roll. We'll find
that's
out.
Some grim ass shit. I think we can control our destiny somewhat too. I think that's part of it. But
it's big cycle.
Maybe I think about that too. Like maybe when these people are viewing these things or seeing these visions or whatever they're doing, that they're seeing what would happen if things continued on the path at that very specific moment.
Yeah, it's like Lord of the Rings when he looks into the ball and he sees what happens if he doesn't.
Well, yeah. So Tom Campbell's big gist is that when you're doing psychic readings about the future, you're taking a probability of what's likely to happen. So the further you go into the future, there's a broader range of what's probable. But if you just go once, you're going to get something that's the most probable. or perhaps not even the most probable, but you're seeing probable futures. You're not seeing definite futures because the future isn't definite. Everything is still open-ended. So future readings are always probable and things are open to change. So no matter how good the psychic is, they might see something that is 10% probable or 33% probable or whatever, but you can't be sure until you get there because things aren't determined in that way.
So like you said, though, these tests were all double-blinded. But do you think that, so like, you know what mentalists are?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so they're like fake psychics, if you will, or people that use body language and like little facial recognition or facial twitches. You know, like they use everything and they put this like story together, and then they can tell people. They're basically like
charlatans.
Yeah, charlatans, if you will. But there was, you know, there's a guy on Joe Rogan, I forget his name, but he was a mentalist, and he was saying that all these people are fake, and he knows how they did it. And Uri, I don't know who this guy was, but Uri Geller was a fake, and all sorts of shit.
Was it Darren Brown?
Yeah, is he like a
mind reader?
Yeah, is he like a 50-year-old guy? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's not that guy. I don't know. But this guy was just he was a mentalist, and he was trying to say all this shit's fake, and he knows how they do it, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Well, that's what's really funny. Like James Randi is the most famous one. But there's a bunch of, for whatever reason, there's a bunch of scientists that are all about stage magic that spend their whole life being skeptics about psychics. It's like they think that, you know, they're stage magician. Their whole thing is, the paradigm that they use is that everything is a gimmick and a trick. And so they just extend that to psychics as well. They basically can't get out of that paradigm that everything is a stage magic show. And so their whole life is hell-bent on proving that everything is just stage magic. So I mean,
we're all performing stage magic right now for somebody. I don't know who the fuck it is, but
yeah, right. But anyway, so I just think that those are people that get stuck in that paradigm and just don't feel the need that they don't ever feel any proof that they have to exit it, that their worldview is solid or whatever. And I find it a little bit boring.
All those people, you know, what's interesting about all those people, they're atheists, most of them. Most of them are like, oh, I know how to do this. This is fake, blah, blah, blah. Even some magicians. I know I was watching, what was it? Expedition Unknown. They had like a whole afterlife mini series thing where they were interviewing Dr. Eben Alexander, who was the famous near-death guy that wrote the book. And then they did the opposite, where they went to like a complete atheist, and the person they went to was Penn Jillette or whatever, the magician.
Yeah, Penn and Teller, baby.
And it's just like the way he thinks about life, man. He's got to be depressed as fuck, man.
Yeah, he's a magician who thinks that everything is stage magic and that everyone is out to be an illusionist. It's just whatever. They can't seem to escape their own view of the world. And it's like, just because you're interested in stage magic doesn't mean that every person ever is trying to hoodwink the audience. I don't know. That's a great example. Penn Jillette, there's so many. I mean, it started with Harry Houdini. I don't know if you know that story.
Yeah. He said he was gonna come back and tell his wife some secrets or something.
Well, more than that though. When he was alive, you know, he was really close with his mom. And when his mom died, this psychic told him, "I can get in touch with your mom." And so Harry Houdini was heartbroken or whatever. So it was like this whole episode in his life almost fell apart because he was so close to his mother. She died. He could barely handle it. So this psychic was trying to take advantage of him basically, and like use tricks and read diaries and stuff, and tried to trick him and say, "I've been in contact with your mom and she wants you to know everything's fine." But he like found out that he was trying to, you know, she's preying on him because someone in his family had just died. This was a big thing in the turn of the century in America. A bunch of that just happened all the time.
They still do that shit.
They still do it, exactly. So Harry Houdini found out that he was being preyed upon, and he made it his life goal to expose, like you said, mentalists, spiritualists is what they called them in the turn of the century in America. They do seances and stuff like that. So Harry Houdini set this trend of stage magicians debunking people claiming to have real magic powers. This is the trend. So people that pretend to have magic powers think it's really inauthentic to actually claim to have magic powers. You know, you're supposed to, as a magician, that's going too far. You're basically cheating because you're saying, "Oh, I actually have it," instead of just being. So that's why you get all of these magicians that get really mad at other magicians that claim to have actual powers. That's the whole answer. That's why magicians are always mad at psychics.
That's similar to the Penn Jillette thing too, because when he was being interviewed, he was talking about how his mom died or something, and then his sister died, and then all of a sudden he had like no faith or whatever, and that kind of pushed him down that road, and that's kind of why he's so pessimistic about it.
Yeah, it's kind of it's just like that's the point, is that the materialist reductionist worldview is a depressing worldview that you would have the absolute right to be depressed about if it were true, but it's not true. It's demonstrably false, and that's my big point. In all of this, in all of my realms of research, is that in every sense, there's always a big paradox that's glaringly obvious, and that some people just don't want to admit or whatever. So all of this stuff points to these big paradoxes.
So are you sold then on the whole remote viewing thing being real, or are you still skeptical?
No,
or
like I said the last interview, it's for me, it's not there. The idea of believing in materialism is blatantly not an option for me anymore. It's just simply falsified to me. That worldview is falsified for me. So that leaves an empty space for another type of worldview. So for me, consciousness is a way more coherent worldview. It's not about like, yes, I'm completely convinced that consciousness exists and that it's not produced by the body, and that it must be likely that we survive death, and that all of this literature and all of these people and all the experts and all the psychics and they all have something to say that's true. It's not all true. Most of it's, but like, yes, there are larger parts of reality. To me, it's not even, they literally can't explain how the brain works based on materialism. So it's false. It's a false, we need something else.
It's fucking weird, man. Life's fucking weird. That's for sure.
Weird. Yep. But you just have to have that sense of love. Love is always the ultimate. It's grounded in love. So, as weird as it is, it's also okay.
Is there anything you want to add to that, or was that it?
I think we did pretty good. Yeah. Remote viewing.
We'll have you back on, and we'll find some other stuff to talk about. You're pretty well rounded on your research and stuff. But is there a website, or what's your Instagram for people to check out your glass work?
It's my full name, Andrew Tischler Glass, on Instagram. That would be awesome if anyone wants to check it out. That'd be super cool. And then
these fucking patterns are sick, by the way. You guys got to check this shit out.
I would say check out Russell Targ's third Eye Spies. It's coming out in February of 2019. I'm going to try to figure out where it's showing. Maybe hit up the event, or just hopefully it comes out and we can all watch it soon in February. It's third Eye Spies. I'm definitely supporting him. So that would be the thing to go check out. Check that out.
Awesome. And you can check us out at Mike and Maurice mindescape.com, and you can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. Well, Andrew, it's been a pleasure, and we're gonna have you back. We're gonna have you back on, and we're gonna find some stuff to talk about. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. I appreciate both of you guys' time, and you guys you guys do good work. It's always nice talking to you.
Well, we appreciate it. So everybody, peace out.
Peace.